Recording. So welcome back to our Gita Gyan level 2, Essence of Bhagavad Gita. So we will begin with our pranam prayers. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Sri Rupam Sagrajadam Sahagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhanvitam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurange Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin iti namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So Haribol, Hare Krishna again. Welcome back. So we are doing our Gita Mahatmya. And this is, we are currently working on chapter 5. So Sri Vishnu says, now I will describe to you the unlimited glories of the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Listen very carefully. So our story here begins in this place called the state of Madra. So you can see here, Madra is somewhere northern part of Punjab area. So this is India, Himalaya mountains. So this is, and then Afghanistan comes here. So you can see here Gandhari, actually it's Gandhara. So that's the city where Gandhari came from. Gandhari is the mother of all the Kauravas. So Gandhara is modern day Kandahar, Afghanistan. So anyway, that entire area, the area is called Madra. And it said that based on his current history, mainstream history also, that this state of Madra used to extend all the way up to even Mesopotamia and Iraq and Syria. So the capital in those days used to be in somewhere where modern day Syria is, or near as far as Western Iraq. So how we know this? So it says in the Mahabharata, there's some descriptions here and there. Like in the Mahabharata, there was a king of Madra that he's known as Shalya. So he is the last commander for the Kauravas to fight. After Bhishma, then it was Drona. Then after Drona, it was Karna. Then after Karna died, then Shalya was the last general for the Kauravas. And he used to come from Madra province. So anyway, so just a bit of background on the state of Madra. So in that state of Madra, there is a town of the name Puru Kutsapur. And in that Puru Kutsapur, there lived a Brahmana called Pingala. So that's his name. So during his childhood, Pingala was trained in various Brahminical activities. But though he was taught all these Brahminical activities, he did not have interest in them. He never had any interest. He wasn't a good student. And he was always, he was just doing it because he had to, and he never kept his mind on it. And eventually he mixed with some bad association, had some friends who were also like him, not interested in everything. And as he grew up, when he reached his youth, he gave up his Brahminical pursuits and instead changed his Varna. So he changed his Varna to become, he was very interested in music. So he gave up, he started to learn how to play instruments very well and how to sing very well and how to dance also. So the arts of the Nritya Shastra. So his passion was the Nritya Shastra. So, in those days, even art and drama and all was all usually focused on based on religiosity. So the hymns and the music and the drama were usually based on the activities of the Lord and of the Devatas. So they were very much within the Brahminical scripts, but it was not the mainstream. Brahmanas, they will usually learn how to do fire sacrifice. They will learn how to do various rituals, and they will learn the Upanishads. But he wasn't interested in all that, and he left, and then he did all these things, and he became very good. So while he was pursuing his passion in singing and dancing and all that, he became very famous slowly. And he became so famous eventually that the king of the land himself wanted to have him as his royal musician at court. So the king of that land invited him and agreed to keep him in the palace, and he also became the one of the royal musicians. So the problem with this is, now this Pingala wasn't a very strong Brahmana. So as we know, he shifted his Varna, he started doing other things, and he wasn't very well trained in his mind and all that. And when he went to court, he wasn't, due to the change of environment, the change of association. In court, there will be all kinds of people, very political people who are very passionate. So therefore, with the change of association, slowly he also let go his Brahminical qualities. So he found that he became more and more influenced by these people in court, and eventually he also became almost like them. So in fact, he started picking up a lot of bad habits. So he became degraded more and more. He started also taking intoxication. He started eating meat and all that. And eventually he was also very enamored with all the ladies, because there will be a lot of ladies in court. So like that, he degraded slowly into sinful life. So he started to even enjoy with other men's wives in court. So there were a lot of affairs, opportunities for these things to happen. So there were a lot of sinful activities and intoxication. And in this way, he became degraded. But he was still a very good musician, and he remained at court. And he was such a good musician that he became very proud. In fact, he was one of the best in the court, and his pride was very great. But at the same time, he was also very close to the king. So because of his skill, the king also liked him very much. And due to the king's pressure also, this Brahmana, this Pingala, let go many of his naturally born good qualities. And then he became like this. But he developed an intimacy with the king. So the king would sometimes meet with him privately, and they will talk. And this Pingala, during this time, he would poison the king's ears about his enemies in court. So sometimes he will tell bad things about those who are in court, who are, who pose a challenge to him, or if he feels threatened with them, or if he doesn't like them. So he misused his position, and in this way he whispered a lot of negative things to the king, and he became expert in criticizing people. He will find fault in everybody, and in this way he will pass his ideas to the king. Now this Pingala, though he was like this, he had a wife. When he came to this palace, and after he became very famous in the palace, there were many ladies who wanted to also get married to him. But there was this one lady who was called Aruna, and she managed to sort of, what you could say, cook the big fish. So in that sense, she was out looking for a suitable husband, and she managed to seduce and eventually get married to this Pingala. And she did not get married to him because she loved him or she wanted or whatever. It's because she understood that he was currently one of the most foremost in the court, especially very close to the king. So she wanted power. So in one sense, a gold digger, you could say. So she was born in a low family, a family of low character. Not only her entire family were in that kind of a situation. But somehow, so she got married to this Pingala. And this Pingala also, he found her very attractive and everything. And so this is another problem, isn't it? So when one becomes very famous and one becomes very powerful, then they start attracting sharks. So that's the problem. But nevertheless, this Aruna, she wasn't satisfied just with remaining the wife of this Pingala. So what she would do, she would go around and have many other affairs with a lot of other men also in the court. So she was very lusty and enjoyed relationships with many people, right? But the husband didn't know. So, but one day, however, the husband found out. He was given a tip. Pingala came back, and then he caught her red-handed with some amorous other men and all. So he found out what she's been doing, and other people also came and told him. So then, like a snake disturbed in her den, this Aruna showed her true colors. She became very angry with this Pingala, and she plotted to take her vengeance. So what she did, before her reputation could be smeared, the moment she was caught red-handed, that same night, she decided to kill the husband. So she hired some dacoits, some assassins and royal assassins, and they cornered him in the garden at night, and they kept him. And she came and she personally chopped off his head and buried his body in the garden of that palace. So that was the end of Pingala. But we would think that, materially that would be the end of the body. But we are not the body, we are the soul. So what happened to Pingala after that? So Pingala had to go to hell. He had to go to Yamaraj, right? And when he went to Yamaraj, he had to suffer for his various sinful activities, right? And for many, 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 many hundreds and thousands of years, he was suffering in hell, in the various regions of hell. And after clearing all the depth of bad karma that he had to clear in hell, then eventually he took birth in various species, and then eventually he took the birth of a vulture. And he remained like that. So we will come back to him. But meanwhile, what happened with Aruna? Aruna, after the death of her husband, she put on the tragic widow guise, and she went and she put on the tragic widow guise and cheated everybody. But at the same time, she was freely enjoying with many men and everything. And eventually, as a consequence of her habits, she contracted some venereal disease. So this is a sexually transmitted type of a disease, right? Like syphilis or gonorrhea, I'm not sure which one. But anyway, she got one, something like that. And eventually her youthful body and her beauty faded and she became rather ugly and unattractive. So it's a special type. And she lost her youth and her vigor and her beauty. And eventually she died a painful death due to that venereal disease. And she was also shunned by the palace and everything. So you could say, she had to answer for lots of crimes. But anyway, when she died, it wasn't sufficient. She also went to Yamaraj. So went to Yamaloka, and she also had to go through all kinds of torture and suffering for hundreds of thousands of millions of years. And eventually, after that, she had to take birth in the lower species of life as animals. And she eventually took birth as a pigeon. Sorry, not a pigeon, a parrot. And this was a body of a female parrot. So like that. Now, it so happened that one day, this parrot, this Aruna, or what, she was Aruna in her previous birth, now she's a parrot. So she was searching for here and there for food. And it so happened that this Aruna parrot happened to come in the same region where the vulture was also living. Now, this vulture was Pingala. So it is the coincidence. One cannot say it's coincidence. It's all by design, but apparently it looks like coincidence. So after many, many birds and after many, many years, they happened to meet at the same area. And when the vulture saw this pigeon, so, as we take different birds, we carry our vasanas, we carry our impressions, we carry our desires and impressions with us, right? So something awoke this vulture's feelings that the vulture wanted to attack and kill this pigeon, not pigeon, parrot. I don't know why I keep saying pigeon, it's parrot. So somehow the impressions of his last birth, because if you remember, this Pingala was killed by this Aruna in his last birth. So that impression of vengeance was there. So he wanted to, even in this animal, he was not fully aware, but yet he wanted to take vengeance somehow. He wanted to go and attack this pigeon, parrot. So he attacked this parrot, the female parrot, with his beaks, and they were flying and somehow was attacked. And this parrot, she was dying, not yet died yet, but after being attacked terribly by this vulture, she fell from the branch or the sky as she was flying, and she dropped into a river, something like a stream. And in that stream, there was a skull, a human skull. And in that human skull, some of the water of that stream entered into that skull, the cavities of the skull. And this pigeon dropped right into the cavity of that skull, within the waters of the cavity of that skull, and unable to escape, it died out of drowning and due to its wounds. So this is what happened to the pigeon, Aruna pigeon. Now, it so happened that at the same time, while this vulture was there, he perched on that branch while the pigeon, because the vulture wanted to eat that parrot. So he was looking about on how he could come and eat that parrot while it was caught in the cavity of the skull. And then at the same time, suddenly there was a hunter. And this hunter, he happened to see this vulture and he wanted to shoot. So I don't know why he shot the vulture, but anyway, he shot the vulture. And the vulture was pierced by this arrow, and it also fell into the stream, and also its head dropped into one of the mouth cavity, into the mouth cavity of the skull within the stream. And eventually it also died. So it died while its head was in the mouth cavity of this skull. Then, as usual, eventually, but in animal life, usually what will happen is after different species of animal life, it will go on to the higher species of animal life, and like that it will move on from one species until it reaches the species of the cow. So from lower species, from insects, from plants to insects to fish, aquatic creatures, and then eventually it becomes amphibious and reptiles and mammals, and then like that there's an evolution of species. And then finally, the final species amongst animal species is the cow. Once it reaches the species of the cow, the next birth will be a human. So it doesn't go to hell or anything like that. It doesn't go to see Yamaraj while it is going through this evolution. But this time, for this vulture, instead of going to the next body of the animal kingdom, a higher body, but it straight away went to Yamaloka. So that was strange. So not only the vulture went, the parrot, the Aruna who became the parrot, also went to Yamaloka, and they came across Yamaraj again, and they became and they were conscious. So they became very afraid because they knew what they had gone through, and now they are back again to Yamaloka. They became very afraid, but we are animals. We didn't do anything. When they came in front of Yamaraj, why have you brought us here? And then Yamaraj told them, I brought you here to inform you that all your sins have been cleared. So therefore, you don't have to take another animal birth again and go through the evolution of species and all that, and become a human and all that. So your sins are completely cleared. So there is nothing for you left to remain in this material world. So you will be promoted to Vaikuntha, where you will be purified. So when they heard this, they became very amazed. And of course, they were very, very happy. After their ecstasy subsided, they became amazed. And then they asked Yamaraj, could you please tell us why we are going to Vaikuntha? We understand that we are very, very sinful. We have done so many sinful activities. So how is it that we are able to go to Vaikuntha straight away? Then Yamaraj told them, actually, it is not due to your own actions. It is due to a special mercy which you had got. So the special mercy is, he was saying, once on the banks of the river Ganga, there lived a great devotee of Lord Vishnu, and his name was Vat. So he was a very saintly personality. He was free from having what he used to do. He used to daily recite the Bhagavad Gita chapter 5. So after recite, this was his sadhana. Without fail, he would many times recite again and again with great faith, because that was his instruction of his guru. So after doing this for many years, he became completely free from lust and greed and so many other impurities. All the anarthas or impurities left him from his heart, and he became very pure. He was such a pure devotee. So eventually he lived his life, and then he gave up his body in old age. And when he gave up his body, Pushpa Vimana came, a flying aeroplane that came all the way from Vaikuntha, carried him and brought him back to the abode of the Lord. So that was what happened to Vat. But what happened to his mortal body? The mortal remains, usually those days, they will just, sometimes they will cremate, and then the remains of the cremation, they will put it in the Ganga. So in those days, the cremation, sometimes normal traditional cremation, some pieces and parts of the bones are still left intact. It's not burnt completely sometimes. So it somehow so happened that when they left him in the river, some parts of his bones were left. So his skull happened to travel along the river, and eventually it came into this stream. But many years have passed, many years have passed, decades even, and this skull happened to come into the stream, and it was lodged over there in that stream. And because both of you fell into that skull, and you are animals, right? And then you died. while you were in that skull of this wonderful personality, what, right? So because of that, you got great mercy, you got extreme purification. And in this way, all the purification which this devotee what had received by chanting the Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, it was able to also pass on to some extent to you. So therefore, you became pure, you became cleared of all sin and eligible for Vaikuntha. So he was, this is Bhagavad Gita. So what was Bhagavad Gita? Chapter 5, if you see the chapter, it's called Karma Yoga, action in Krishna consciousness, or Karma Sannyasa Yoga in Sanskrit. So this is what happened. So when they heard about this, they became very happy and they glorified Bhagavad Gita chapter 5 as well. So in this way, both the vulture and the pigeon, parrot, which fell into the cavity of the skull, they were liberated. Now, one may ask, how is that possible? So, if you remember, whatever you attain at the time of death. So, the time of death is very, very important time. One has to be very. It's like, say, the life is like the preparation, and death is the examination. So, at the time of death, it is very important. So, one has to be very. For human beings, whatever we think at the time of death, right, that we will attain. So our consciousness has to be very careful. Now, this vulture and this pigeon were not thinking of Bhagavad Gita. They were not pigeon again, parrot. This parrot and this vulture, they were not thinking of Bhagavad Gita. They were not even thinking of the holy names. They were not thinking of chapter 5. They were not thinking of devotee what. They were not even thinking of Krishna or Vishnu, anybody. Then what happened? So what happened is because they were innocent, because they were animals, there was no offense in their mind. They didn't take anything lightly, and they were innocent animals. So because of their innocence as animals, right, when they came in contact with the pure remnants of a pure devotee, automatically they were able to benefit from the purity of that remnants of the pure devotee. And what to speak of, somehow they died touching that pure remnants of the pure devotee. So because they died surrounded and lodged and touching that remnants of the pure devotee, therefore they became completely purified. So we will discuss this a bit more later. So in this way, Aruna and Pingala, they became very happy, and they were pure. They became completely purified, and they were elevated into Vaikuntha. So then Sri Vishnu, he concludes the story of this chapter 5 Gita Mahatmya. My dear Lakshmi, anyone who hears the 5th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, even the most sinful, will attain Vaikuntha. So that's how it ends. Srimad Bhagavad Gita chapter 5 ki jai. So let's see what are the lessons, or try to understand the story, and what we can learn from this. Okay. So before we talk, we will not be, before we go into the points, right? Anyone wants to share any points that you think you could understand from this story? Anything you could tie to the Bhagavad Gita, or anything, any interesting thing that you have understood?
Prabhu, how is it both of them landed in the same place both the times?
Yeah. So that's a big,
Very
so that's a big coincidence, isn't it? So that's how karma works. Karma, so what we can understand is there are no coincidences in life. So that's the perspective of the scriptures. We think a lot of things are random or chance, or sometimes we say luck, right? So there is no real thing as luck, random, or chance. Everything is by design, and it is perfectly executed by Yamaraj and assisted by his able servant Chitragupta. So they know every single nuances. So also we have, right, the mills of God grind slow, but they grind exceedingly small. So they are very, very fine. Not even a detail or a point is missed. And also it is mentioned in the scriptures also, like usually when someone does something bad to another person, if they do not let go their feelings of vengeance or anger or whatever it is, even after many lifetimes, they will again come to our to actually create problem for that person who previously created a problem for them. So like sometimes in our lives we see, sometimes we just go, a practical stranger would create so much problem for us. You just go to a counter somewhere and the person behind the counter is rude to you, or it just happens that way. So why would all these things just happen like that? So it's the understanding is somewhere in our lifetimes, somewhere many years ago or many lifetimes ago, we would have inconvenienced that person, or we would have caused some kind of hinsa to that person. And if that person kept a grudge and never forgave when he died, right? So then again, he has to take birth again. So of course, he takes birth because he's not purified, and then he goes through his various karma and everything and pursues his desire. But along the course of that, he gets his opportunity to carry out his vengeance, or to, tit for tat. So he gets the chance to do that. The same thing goes for animals also. So it's actually mentioned in the scriptures. When someone sacrifices a goat, for example, for Kali, right? They will whisper to the goat a certain mantra in which they will say mamsa. Mamsa means meat. But in that mamsa, it also, the meaning behind that ma amsa, ma himsa, right? It also means that what I do to you, you will do to me in the future. That is the esoteric meaning behind that word mamsa, meat or mantra. So therefore, there is a chance. It's never random. It is never coincidence. So in this case, it was arranged in such a way, perfect, crossroad for them to meet, and for this vulture to have the opportunity to execute its vengeance upon the parrot. Okay, Prabhuji? Yeah. Is that okay?
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Prabhu.
All right. Anyone wants to share any points? Okay, so if not, then I will just highlight a few points which we could learn from this story, right? So first point is, you notice how it all got started. The Brahmana Pingala, he was supposed to be a Brahmana. He was given good education, good family upbringing, good conduct. So what did he do with that opportunity? So that's the problem, isn't it? Sometimes we are given opportunities in life, but what do we do with it, right? So this kind of people, when opportunities are given and they don't take full advantage of it, the Shastras, they call them as kripana or miser, kanjus, kedekut. So a miserly person. Why human beings are called miserly? Because the human birth of life is a very rare birth. It is a very special birth, because in that birth, one is able to think and understand and know what is God, who am I, why am I here, to have this kind of thinking. As an animal, they cannot think like this. So when they get this kind of ability in their thinking, but they use their human life only to do four things ultimately, which is eating, mating, sleeping, and defending, which is also common for the animals. So then what is the necessity of taking a human birth? So therefore, the scriptures call them kripana, miserly. They have attained something very valuable, but they have completely ignored the value, and they are using it for something which is very base. Just like if we have if we have lots of money or whatever, and we don't use it properly, instead we stinge for a lot of worthy things and whatever, right? So then we are called miser. So a human being who stinges with his ability, who stinges with his opportunities, to get higher realizations, to escape this cycle of birth and death, and instead uses his life and time to do basic materialistic things, that person is called Kripana. So what has happened? You see Bhagavad Gita 3:35. Instead of taking advantage of that human birth as a Brahmana, taking advantage of the teachings, of the education that he was given, he instead decided to become a musician. Now, yes, musician is all that is fine, but that is not the goal of life, as Prabhupada likes to say. We are not born in this world to pursue our passions. That is secondary. That is something which is part-time. Our main purpose or our main goal in life is to become a devotee of the Lord and go back to Godhead and to end this human birth. We are not born here to become engineers or doctors or scientists or politicians or to become rich or to become wealthy or powerful. That is secondary. That is whatever due to fate. But our main goal is to become devotees. So it is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duty perfectly. So this Brahmana was also guilty of this. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duty, for to follow another's path is dangerous. So this is Bhagavad Gita. Krishna doesn't approve one should switch one's dharma. So if he is given a birth in a particular situation, he should maintain that, even if he performs it not in a very good manner, but because one is not performing duty for one's own satisfaction. One is performing duty for the Lord's satisfaction. So by doing that, one elevates in one's consciousness and one gets punya. So that is, in this way, one advances in his next life. But if one doesn't do that and one is only thinking about one's own satisfaction and abandons one's duties, so then sin will follow. So that's the problem. So this Brahmana, Pingala, he left everything and he took up this musician and everything. So that was contrary to scripture. So therefore, all the other problems started with him. So then 337 also. So we can also see what happened after that. He fell sway to temptation, right? So then we have also a verse from 337. Arjuna will ask, what is forcing a person to perform sinful activities as if he's being, forcefully dragged into it, even though he knows it's wrong? Because he's Brahmana, he knew it's wrong, but he still did it. So Krishna answers, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion. So what has happened with this Pingala? He became fully in contact with the mode of passion. He left his Brahminical mode of goodness occupation and he went into palace, to the royal kingdom. And there he came fully in contact with all the various people in the mode of passion. And he became overwhelmed with it. And his lust, which was within his heart, awoke and he could not control. And then what happened to also the wife, Aruna? Aruna also had full of lust, but her lust was later transformed into wrath. You see, when lust is suppressed or frustrated, what it becomes? It becomes wrath or anger, krodha. And then when that happens, one loses one's intelligence, memory, and good fortune, and they start to perform things which will bring them to hell. So this is what Aruna felt. Aruna was completely a slave of lust, and when it became frustrated, when she realized that she was found out by her husband, she decided to break all principles and kill him. So therefore, she had to suffer. So why are these things happening? So a person who is not in union with the divine, who is greedy for the fruits of his labor, become entangled. So therefore, you can see here how Pingala and Aruna both became fully entangled in karma kanda activities, right? So what were they doing? They were doing karma kanda activities simply to gratify their lust and attaining success and material prosperity. This was the goal and focus of Aruna and Pingala. Why it happened to them? Because they were not in union with the divine. They were not in contact. They did not. So therefore, they fell prey to all these things, right? So people enmeshed in karma kanda can also learn how to attain salvation. The same activity which they perform, which is performed in ignorance, will lead them to destruction and suffering and repeated birth of cycle of birth and death, just like what Aruna and Pingala had went through. Their activities, they were performing activities, but it was full of ignorance. But the same activities again, if performed out of jnana, knowledge, right? Or Ajnata Sukruti, for example, like you can see the sage, the saintly person, what, right? He was also performing activities. What kind of activities did he perform? He was reciting the Bhagavad Gita. He didn't indulge in all these things. And in this way, he attained liberation. He attained salvation. And you can also see, simply by dying, the same activity, the vulture and the parrot, when they died in contact with the pure devotee of the Lord, they also, by that activity of simply dying in the association of a pure devotee, they attained salvation and liberation. So the act of dying was also an activity. So not by performing no activity can one attain the supreme. One has to perform activity. So if you remember chapter 5, Arjuna became confused a little. So he's telling Krishna, you're asking me to fight, but then, earlier you told me knowledge, jnana yoga is the topmost. So if knowledge is better, why should I perform this kind of activities? So activities still need to be performed, right? We will talk about that in a while. Okay, so then what else? So now the very interesting part about how this parrot and this vulture attained salvation. It's amazing. They were completely sinful and they didn't do any pious activities. The only thing they did was to die in contact with the pure devotee. So we can learn a few things here. This is not the first time this kind of stories were given. Previous story, chapter 4 also, remember the story where the trees became liberated, right? Eventually, simply because the sage, the saintly man, put his head and lied on those trees. So in this way, the trees served him. So by serving him, they got Agyata Sukruti. Sukruti means fortune. And Agyata means unforeseen, amazing fortune. So it came simply due to the blessings. Now, fortune, the real fortune for a soul is to go back to Godhead, is to finally escape from this cycle of birth and death. And the Lord is eager, the Supreme Lord Krishna is eager to give this fortune to those souls, but he doesn't want to interfere in their free will. So he finds various ways how to inject this fortune to them. So sometimes he gives them directly, sometimes he tricks them into it. So, so therefore he gives various nuggets. So one of the main vehicles of the Lord's mercy, Kripa Shakti, right? The main mercy of the Lord, the main ways the mercy of the Lord comes through is through his devotees. So as I mentioned previously, the devotee is even more powerful than even Ganga, right? Of course, Ganga is a devotee, but then the pure devotee of the Lord is very purifying. How we saw in chapter 4, right? So the same here we are seeing, even in death, in chapter 4, the devotee was still at least alive, right? But in chapter 5, he died. And simply by coming in contact with his remnants, bones. Now, usually for a normal person, the bone is considered contaminated. Nobody wants to associate with the bones of a dead man, right? It's contaminating. But for a pure devotee, nothing is contaminated. So when he dies, everything is purified. Therefore, rituals are not really necessary. And all kinds of this, whatever, it's not really necessary there, because the whole point of ritual is to purify. But this person has attained the goal of all purifications. So you can see here the Bhagavatam. The value of a moment's association with the devotee of the Lord, a moment's association, cannot even be compared to the attainment of heavenly planets or liberation from matter, and what to speak of worldly benedictions in the form of material prosperity, which are for those who are meant for that. So the moment's association with a pure devotee is extremely valuable because it has the potency to liberate us from this material cycle of birth and death. Why? Because remember from previous chapter, they quoted a verse, Bhagavatam, Tirtha Kurvanti Kurtani. So that verse says, because the devotees carry the Supreme Lord within their hearts. So they carry the Supreme Lord within their hearts. So wherever they go, they are like a moving holy place. So they purify everything they touch and they come across. So here's another verse. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita 5.6, a thoughtful person engaged in devotional service can achieve the Supreme without delay. So therefore, this devotee, what? He was very thoughtful and he was performing devotional activity. And within that life, he was able to achieve. And not only he himself was able to achieve, because of his purification, it is described also in other places, his entire family also gets liberated. 100 generations up and 100 generations down. And on top of that, whoever comes in contact with that person, right, also gets Agyata Sukriti according to the level of faith that the person has. Now, if a person is very faithfully serving a pure devotee of the Lord, don't mind if I can mute some people. Okay, sorry. Now, if a person is faithfully, with great faith, serves a pure devotee of the Lord, very easily his purification takes place according to his faith. So then one may ask, what about this vulture and this parrot? What faith did they have? So they did not have any faith. So without having any faith, one can still get the benediction. But what is important is one must not be offensive. So that's the problem with human beings. They may not have faith, but they have offenses in their heart. They will offend the person. They will offend the process of the person. So this stops the flow of mercy when one is offensive. Whereas these animals, they are innocent. They do not understand the concept of offense. So they simply came in contact and they were innocent and they died in contact with the remnants of the pure devotee of the Lord. So in this way, they were able to get the benedictions, to get purification completely from all sinful activities. So those are some of the concepts which we can learn from this chapter 5. So then one may ask, what does this story has to do with chapter 5? Okay, let's see what chapter 5 is all about. So chapter 5, if you remember, is entitled Action in Krishna Consciousness or Karma Sannyasa Yoga. So action, it's all about practical action. Now chapter 3 was Karma Yoga, right? And then chapter 4 was Jnana Yoga, knowledge. Karma Yoga should lead to knowledge about the transcendence. And what was the goal of that knowledge? It was Krishna, right? Sarva Dharma, there were many verses, Janma Karma Chami Divyam and all that. We discussed about how the goal of all mysticism and all yoga is to ultimately become a devotee of the Supreme Lord. So that is the culmination. So to understand that and everything, so now that we know how do we engage our activity? So Arjuna became confused. Which is better? Should I now become a sannyasi and dedicate myself to jnana? Or you are telling me to work. You are telling me to still continue the fight. So how to understand? So therefore, we discussed this also. Therefore, Krishna says, what he says? He says, both methods are good. The dedication of one's life to jnana is good, but working in devotion is even better. So he says that in 5.2 to 5.6. So this is where he begins to differentiate clearly between the bhakti path and the jnana path. The bhakti path is much easier to do, it's more practical, and it is also giving us the highest benediction. So it goes on. Then Krishna will say, you should focus on true renunciation, because one who wants to renounce and become a sannyasi is very dangerous. Unless one is really renounced, one cannot take to that path. If you are still thinking about your kingdom and everything, you may say you're renounced out of frustration. But if you're still thinking in the mind, that is false renunciation, Falgu Vairagya. Remember? So we discussed all this in detail in level 1. So therefore, he goes on to say, both detachment to matter is important. Detachment to matter is important. So therefore, you need to renounce, yes. But at the same time, attachment to bhakti is required. So therefore, we need to also perform activities. So a different type of activities, or what we call akarma, which are different types of activities. So therefore, one doesn't have to retire. One still has to do, one can do work, but now the motive is completely different. So one does work now for Krishna's satisfaction. So the purpose is no longer for our satisfaction or for our gain. It is for the satisfaction of Krishna. And then he goes on to talk about how to do this properly. So action in yoga bhakti. So from 5.7 to 5.18, he discusses in some details how to do this action in bhakti yoga. So he talks about the way of the yogi with transcendental knowledge. At the end of it, what it will give us? It will give us equal vision. We should be able to see the Paramatma in every living entity. We will be able to see people equally, right? So that is what one of the side effects which we will get, a symptom of a more advanced devotee. And then he goes on to talk about the liberated yogi eventually. After doing all these activities in Krishna consciousness, right? Then he talks about how a yogi is liberated. So even in Krishna consciousness, one performs this akarma yoga, he's already liberated, right? So these are some of the points. And then he ends the last verse in chapter 5 with this verse, 529. I will read it. A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the supreme lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. What does he do? He attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. So this is his promise. So we call this the peace formula, right? This is the way we can attain true peace. And true peace means to have this kind of consciousness. One has to understand that ultimately everything depends and belongs to the Supreme Lord. And we are simply trying to execute his desires, to be his servant. So this is the topic of chapter 5. And how do we connect this to this story of the Gita Mahatmya? So the story is, you can see how Aruna and Pingala, they were so enmeshed in karma kanda activities. They were performing activities. They were not doing yoga. But simply, and then we also saw the contrast of the other devotee, the Vak, the saintly person, who was also doing activities. He wasn't going and meditating in the forest or anything like that. What he was doing normal activities, living in the banks of the Ganges. He was maintaining himself and everything. But at the same time, he dedicated his life to devotional activities. He was doing sadhana. That means devotional practice every day, which was reading the Bhagavad Gita chapter 5 daily, constantly. So in this way, he was also performing activities, but there is a big difference between the two activities. Pingala and Aruna, they were doing karma and vikarma, mostly vikarma, right? Karma is for duties. They in fact gave up their duties and they were doing vikarma, sinful activities. So these two will keep them in the cycle of birth and death. But the devotee Vak, he was doing devotional activity, karma, which is able to liberate the person, cut off all the bondage. So we were able to see the difference between normal karma kanda and also devotional activity, karma. At the same time, we also saw how even such people who are completely enmeshed, grossly enmeshed. Sometimes we see in the world, there are so many people who are you cannot even imagine that they will become devotees. They are like, so into materialism or material activities. We may think, how can we ever help such people? How can we in any way help them? So this is the way we can help them. We can be that agyata sukruti which we can give to others. So this is what devotees of the Lord try to do. That's why devotees try to preach. That's why devotees try to give this message to others, because we want to be that agyata sukruti, that means by which other people can get benefited. And what does Krishna say about such people who help him in this, he tells them such people are very dear. He's very dear to the Lord. So therefore, we are trying to do that. So there are many ways to do this. For example, we can try to, even if they don't want to listen, okay, they don't want to hear Bhagavad Gita, okay, never mind. Then what can we do for them? Then we can chant Hare Krishna for them. They can hear. We can try to get them to hear beautiful kirtans, somehow trick them into saying Hare Krishna in various ways. Try to, in this way, they get Agyata Sukruti. Even giving them Bhagavad Gita, if they don't want to read, is also okay. If they are willing to pay money simply because they paid money from their hard-earned earnings, they get Agyata Sukruti. So if they may not take it up in this life, but they may take up eventually, either in the next life. In some way, it's going to help them. So another powerful way is prasadam. So we cook prasadam, or we give Krishna prasadam to other people. We cook meals and we invite people and we give them. So this is the purpose of temples, to give prasadam. It's also the purpose of grihasthas, householders. Those who are married and have households, right? One of their main duties is to serve the Lord and to cook and give prasadam to people, so that we can, in this way, give the mercy to everyone. So therefore, just like how Pingala and Aruna, simply by coming into contact with such a pure devotee, he was able to be purified and of all karma, and then they were able to be elevated to Vaikuntha. But so this is the power of Agyata Sukruti. Okay, so now we will move on, and later on we will open for questions. So I'll just complete this other aspect of the talk. So we have practical spirituality, right? So 4 pillars of religiosity or dharma, we were talking about this: Satyam, Daya, Saucham, Tapa. We talked about all of them already, except Tapa. So Tapa is the last one. What is Tapa? Tapa means austerities or asceticism. So this is Tapa. Now Tapa was the first leg to be broken by so during Satya Yuga, all qualities were there. But at the end of the Satya Yuga, Tapa was slowly being destroyed. And Tapa, at the end of Satya Yuga, Tapa was destroyed. Then came Treta Yuga. So like that, one by one, the legs were destroyed. So what is Tapa? Now Tapa or austerities consist of 3 things which we should be aware of. So it consists of austerity of the body, austerity of the speech, and austerity of the mind. So here are the references. You can read Bhagavad Gita, chapters 17 and 7. You can find them. So let's go to the first one, austerity of the body. Now, what does austerity of the body entail? So it entails these few things, right? Number 1, pujanam. Austerity of the body. Basically, what is austerity? Austerity means doing things which we don't like to do, right? But we do them for a higher purpose, because it ought to be done, because it is good for us, and because it is purifying for us, and it will elevate us to a higher consciousness. So that is austerity. So that's how the world works also, isn't it? Bhagavad Gita chapter 3, right? Krishna says, you have to perform sacrifice. So austerity means sacrifice also. So if you want to enjoy something in this world, sacrifice has to be done. So some people, they are enjoying the fruits of their previous life sacrifice. But if we plan to enjoy in the future, then one has to still perform sacrifices. So what are these sacrifices? So of course, there is various sacrifices that one can do. Ultimate sacrifice is to offer it to the Supreme Lord, right? So this is austerity of the body, which is pujanam. One should give worship. Worship means, worship doesn't mean praying to the person as the Supreme Lord. It means giving respect. And it means there is some kind of ritual or activity one does to indicate that one is respecting you. For example, we have worship of Guru. We have worship of Devatas, right? We give respect to everybody. So it's not that we disrespect Devatas, we give respect to them, and we also respect the Dvijas, the Brahmanas. So and we give respect to the Guru, the teacher. So that kind of culture is going off nowadays. You can see nowadays children, of course, teachers also have to play their role, but nevertheless, there is a duty for the student to also give the due respect. And nowadays, you don't see that so much. And we also have, so respect for parents, respect for elders. So in those days, people used to respect, they used to, take blessings from the elders. If one knows that this is an elder, one will never raise one's voice. The perfect example of one who gave full respect to all this an example is Yudhishthira Maharaj. If you read about Yudhishthira Maharaj, or if you notice Yudhishthira Maharaj and his activities, he's a perfect example. Arjuna, of course, also. Krishna, of course, he himself set the example. And previously also, Lord Ram perfectly set the example of how to respect his elders, how to respect parents, how to respect the Guru. So why is considered austerity? Because people don't like to do it. Right? People don't like to give respect to their parents, or people don't like it. Sometimes they don't like it. I don't want it. But if one bites one's tongue and one does it, then this is purifying. It purifies us, right? So that's pujanam. That's the first aspect of the respect of the body. To give, to bend down, to give obeisances, to bend down, to put your fingers together like this, and to bend down and take obeisances. This is respect of the body. So that's why we do this for holy people also, for devotees. We take obeisances of each other, right? We have this, we take obeisances of sannyasis. All this is respect. And then austerity of the body is also saucham. Saucham means cleanliness. Now remember, we already talked about cleanliness before, but notice cleanliness also comes under the purview of austerity. So austerity is like the root of all the other 4 qualities, right? The other 4 qualities of dharma, which was truthfulness, mercy, and all of that comes from the root of austerity. One has to perform austerity, saucham. To be clean is also an austerity, right? Nobody likes to bathe several times a day, right? So it's usually at least 2 times a day one should bathe. Brahmacharis should bathe 3 times a day. So like that, there are certain rules on how one should, keep short hair, keep fingernails clipped. So that kind of thing, saucham, right? And then there is something called arjavam. So arjavam is simplicity. So simplicity of the body. One should not need so many complicated arrangements simply to maintain one's own body, right? So sometimes people, they will need so many things. It depends, when someone packs for a holiday, you can see how many things they need to sustain themselves. So, a sannyasi or a brahmachari only has 3 pieces of clothing. So like that. So, some people, they have, I just read some celebrities, they like to have 1,000 handbags. I heard that Jayalalitha, when she died, they saw that she had 4,000 saris in her home. So like that, there are people, they collect hundreds of shoes. Celine Dion has about few hundred shoes in her. Anyway, so like that, we don't want to talk about celebrities and all that. So simplicity, arjavam, live simply, eat simply, live simply, have simple pleasures. Don't need to have complicated pleasures. So this is all austerity of the body, comes under the category of arjavam. And then we have also brahmacharyam. This is also an austerity. Another example of arjavam is simple sleeping arrangements. So, to some sleep on the floor, to learn how to sleep, simple, bathing in cold water. So all this is simplicity. You don't need to have so many arrangements. Of course, it's different when someone is sick or something, but otherwise when one is healthy, one should try to cultivate these austerities. Tapa, brahmacharyam, celibacy. This is also a very important aspect. It strengthens one's ojas. Ayurvedically, if one practices brahmacharyam, and for the ladies, it is chastity, right? To be faithful, chastity. That is what is for the ladies. So it's the power of a lady's chastity is very, very powerful. There are many stories in scriptures which talk about the chastity power of a lady. And similarly, brahmacharya power is also there. One becomes very determined. When one practices brahmacharya, one becomes very determined and strong-willed. Nothing will shake his determination. Strong-willed, right? And his intelligence becomes purified also. So these are some of the things about austerities. And we have the most important of it, tapa. The most important austerity here, all of these must fall under the category of ahimsa. What is ahimsa? Ahimsa is non-violence. Himsa means violence. Ahimsa means non-violence. So one has to practice ahimsa. It's also an austerity sometimes, right? We don't want to say bad things to people. We don't want to do bad things. Sometimes you just feel like I want to whack this person. But then you feel, okay, no, we have to restrain ourselves. So, and remember, ahimsa it comes from the aspect of mercy, compassion, daya. Which is also one of the legs of dharma, the 4 pillars of dharma. Saucham was one of them. Ahimsa is daya, mercy. One of the aspects of daya is ahimsa. So you can see it's all interlinked, but you can understand that tapa or austerity all comes from the root of austerity. So then there is austerity of speech. Now this can be divided into several sections. The first one is anudvega karam. That means non-agitating to the mind. So when someone is opening their mouth to speak, they should think about these few things which I'm going to list out, right? First thing is it anudvega karam? Ask ourselves before we speak, right? Think before we speak. Is what we are going to speak agitating to another person's mind? Is it unnecessarily agitating to another person's mind? That means the person is not, the moment you say something to a person, the person is going to start worrying, the person is going to start feeling very disturbed, having sleepless nights. So if that is so, then maybe it's better not to say it, because bad news has a way of coming anyway. So we don't have to be the instrument of it, right? So therefore we can stop giving negative rumors. Another austerity of speech is satyam, truthfulness, to maintain truthfulness as much as possible, right? But there are exceptions. There are certain situations where it is considered not sinful to not be truthful. So it's very rare, and it doesn't mean one should do that most of the time. One should try as much as possible to be truthful. But exceptions are, for example, when one is joking, right? But even then, one should not be mostly joking like that. There is no sin. The point is there's no punya, but there is no sin when one is not truthful, when one is joking. Or during marriage ceremony. So this is also a bit funny. So sometimes, during marriage ceremony, when someone says a lie, it's not considered a sin. It's mentioned in the scripture. And also when one does business or livelihood, when one is doing his own livelihood, a businessman will say, I'm not making any profit, but that is a lie because they are making profits. But that's how they speak. So that kind of activity, it doesn't make the person pious, but it does not give sin also, because then it's very unfair. So there's no sin involved. And another exception is when there is danger to one's life. So when one utters falsehood in the face of such a danger, then there is no sin. And also to protect the life of a brahmana or protect the life of a cow, also there is no sin. So remember, this rings a bell to you, I hope. Remember, we told the story of the cow, how the cow escaped and ran and took shelter of a brahmana's house, and the thieves came looking for it, and the brahmana, he didn't want to lie, so therefore he pointed with his left hand, if you remember that story. So anyway, to save a cow's life or a brahmana's life, it is also not sinful to lie. So you can see in Mahabharata, some incidences like that took place. Krishna himself told Yudhishthira Maharaj, Dharmaraj, to lie. So the last one is on that aspect. When one wants to have protection from a powerful enemy, so then that also there is an when you can lie at that time and it is not sinful. But that doesn't mean we try to do that. This is exceptions, and we must understand that these are exceptional situations. Okay, then I also forgot just now. Okay, then there's one more. Priyam. We have to check. Is what we are saying not agitating? Is what we are saying truthful? Is what we are speaking priyam? Priyam means pleasing. Is it pleasing to the person? So there are also exceptions for priyam, right? For priyam and anudvega karam, there are exceptions. More exceptions are there. The exceptions are, for example, this is not sinful. This is more of an exception. For example, when one is a guru, when one is a teacher, or when one is a parent, or when one is a superior, right? There is no necessity for priyam or anudvega karam. Because when one is instructing, one can sometimes use hard words to instruct. So there is no fault in that. Or during emergency, in an emergency situation, there is no time for sweet words or non-agitating words. So that time we can let go the anudvega karam and priyam, right? So then there is also sometimes in a situation when there is no other choice. So then we can also avoid priyam and anudvega karam. But otherwise, these are all generally is to be followed. And between anudvega karam and priyam, satyam or truthfulness is more important, right? There is a heavy aspect of sin involved in that. But most important is hitam. And this is all of it has to come from hitam. Now, hitam means, is it beneficial? That's the statement. Hitam means, is it beneficial? Before we speak, the most important thing we have to ask ourselves is what we are going to speak, is it going to bring benefit to that person, right? It should ideally bring benefit to both people, but at least it should bring benefit to the other person that you are going to say. So is it beneficial? Oops, my battery is running low. Okay, never mind, we shall end it soon. Okay, so beneficial, is it beneficial? So that's important. In fact, everything we should speak has to fall under this category. If it's not beneficial, there are no exceptions for this. For hitam, there is no exception. So everyone has to fall into this category. And hitam also comes under the category of daya or mercy, right? This is also one of the roots. So, and then the last one is swadhyaya abhyasanam. This means, is it in pursuance of the Vedic literature? That means whatever we are going to speak, is it from the scripture, or is it recitation of the scriptures, or is it of the scriptures? Now, this one is not always possible, because sometimes we say certain things which are, day-to-day activity. So, but it is important, right? So sometimes it's not there, but as much as possible, we should speak based on these 5 things. And the ones I've highlighted yellow is very important. And the one which I bold is extremely important. So it has to be beneficial. So these are all austerity. So if we practice this consciously while we are speaking, then these are called austerities of speech. And finally, we have austerity of the mind. So here we have mana prasada. So this means satisfaction. Are we satisfied in life? So we should learn to teach ourselves to be satisfied in every situation that we are. We should not be hankering for more or for greater gain. Whatever the Lord has given us, He has given us this family, He has given us this situation, He has given us this house, He's given us this means. So we should learn to be satisfied and peaceful, because with that comes peacefulness. So that is also austerity. We have to teach ourselves to do these things. And saumyatvam. Saumyatvam means simplicity. So simplicity of the body, just now we mentioned, right? Arjavam. That is also simplicity of the mind. So simplicity of the mind means one should not be crooked in our thinking. We should not be political. We should not be thinking devious ways on how to, diplomatic. So one should be very straightforward in our dealings. So that is simplicity of the mind, sampatyam. And then there is maunam. Maunam can mean silence, but it can also mean gravity. But in here, it means gravity. Gravity means one is grave. One is not, what's the opposite of grave? One who's not whimsical. One who's not whimsical, simply, simply say all kinds of rubbish, not serious. So one has to be serious also at most of the time. Maunam, gravity. That is an austerity, to be grave. And then Atma Vinigraha. So this is self-control. One has to learn to control one's senses, anger, lust, desire, all these things one has to learn to control. So self-control. This is also austerity of the mind. And the last one is the most important. This is Bhava Samsuddhir. That means purification of one's existence. Purification. We must perform austerity for purifying our existence. So therefore, sometimes, samskaras are there. Certain ritualistic activities are there, like marriage ceremony. Sometimes people will say, why you have to go through this marriage ceremony? So let's just, live together. So that is not the ceremony itself is purificatory. So we have to go through. So when one wants to have children, one also has to go through certain samskaras, garbhadana samskaras, to get purified. So therefore, these are things which are aimed towards purification. So one has to perform them. It's troublesome. Yes, it takes some effort to do these things, but this is austerity, to be taken as an austerity. So to close, right, the food for the soul, chanting Hare Krishna Mahamantra, if you see, it is definitely tapa, austerity. It is definitely austerity of the body, because we have to spend some time to sit or to concentrate. You can walk also, but it also means that we are dedicating our body towards that austerity. It is vakya. We are speaking. We are chanting Hare Krishna constantly. And it is manas. While we are chanting, we are hearing. And while we are hearing, we are chanting, we are hearing, we are chanting. And the austerity is to off the mind, to close the mind from all thoughts. Right? You can think of the Lord, but everything else, close it and concentrate only on hearing. So hearing is also a function of the mind. So chanting actually engages all three, tapa. So in the beginning, it is definitely an austerity, but eventually the austerity, the poison, becomes nectar, honey. So this is activities in the mode of goodness or transcendental. Initially, it looks like poison, but as we do it, it becomes nectar. So in this way, we'd like to end. Let's say we end with this verse. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Srila Bhagavad Gita ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. So with that, we'd like to end and open up for questions from anybody, if there are.
Prabhu, there are two words I saw in our today's scripture.
Hmm,
One is tapa and one is hitam. Both
hmm,
are Malay or in English, Indian languages.
hmm.
Tapa is a town, hitam is black.
Tapa is what again?
Tapa is a small town near Ipoh,
Oh, okay.
and
Hitam
hitam
means black.
black.
Yes.
So are they Indian Hindu words or Malay words or Sanskrit words?
Well, here the meanings are quite different. So I suppose it's just a coincidence. Somehow they said the words together. But there are many other words which are like anugraha. Anugraha,
Yeah.
gift, right? It's a Sanskrit word. If you look at Duli Yang Maha Mulia Sri Paduka Baginda Yang Dipertuan Agung.
Okay.
Duli means dust, and that's the dust of the feet. Duli Yang Maha Mulia. Maha is Sanskrit, right? Young Dipertuan, okay, the rest of it is not. Paduka, Paduka. So this comes from Lord Ram, Lord Ram's Paduka, the slippers of Lord Ram, and Bharata will keep the slippers of Lord Ram on his head. So the dust of
Okay.
the lotus feet, the duli, the pada duli, is kept on the Paduka, and this is how it's brought also to Malay. Yes, definitely there are lots of words from
Right.
Sanskrit in Malay.
Because I see a lot of temples in Tapa. That's why I was wondering whether it's connected. Temple, plenty of temples there.
Okay, I don't know, probably.
Yeah, I've been to Tapa because of
Hmm.
friends there.
Yep.
It's a
Yeah,
quite
I've
number
been
of
to Tapa
temples.
also.
Yeah. Yeah.
My hometown is Ipoh and Penang. So
Uh,
while going there, I travel through Tapa
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, you have. I'm just considering whether it's Tapa is Tapa for is it because of temples or Hindu